So a very good afternoon to all the speakers who are present here today, our Dream Merchants, our entire Dream Merchants family, and our beloved audience. Today we are gathered on this very delightful Saturday to have a panel discussion with some of the most experienced and some of the most knowledgeable speakers here today on to talk about the subject on economics. I, Ishan Kulkarni, will be the moderator of this panel discussion. Before taking a deep dive into such knowledgeable ocean, I would like to give a small introduction about our college as well as our club Dream Merchants. Vellore Institute of Technology, it's an eminent institute of technology with NRIF ranking of 13, and it is one of the most renowned colleges of India. Working to give the profound and depth knowledge is what our college works for. So in this college arena, we have a powerful business club which is called Dream Merchants. Its main motto is to provide a platform for future leaders and corporate captains. Our objective is to develop an interest among the individuals in the fields of finance and businesses. Uh, we aim to provide opportunities for students to explore a career in finance and trade while understand the relationship between the business and economic disciplines. So if you see that economics in the modern world, it's a subject which has continued to intrigue very several economists and several common people for a lot of centuries. The seemingly mundane activities in everyday businesses bring in a plethora of theories and economic models at work. The interrelation between these theories and life are both interesting and confusing for the common people, and with variety of questions budding up in our minds. And the recent COVID pandemic, which we saw a year back, and which is still going on, had thwarted the global economy as a whole, and has created a lot of confusion and a lot of queries among the direction in which our the Indian economy is going to head in the in the coming future. So so to answer all such baffling questions, I would like to introduce all the speakers that we have here today. So first of all, we have Mr. N.D. Mathur sir. He was currently the Director of Humanities and Social Sciences at Manipal University, Jaipur, having 44 years of teaching experience and has enjoyed professorship of total three disciplines, which are economics, commerce, and management. The subdomains which are pursued by him are globalization and flat world economy. Along with them, Along with this, he also has an experience of teaching at universities at multiple levels, with NID Jaipur being one of them. Also, we have also being a teacher. He's a coach, he's a counselor, and a researcher and an orator as well. So, with so many achievements under his belt and a master in his field, it is our honor to have him to demystify the burning questions among the attendees. Next up, we have Mr. Bharat D. Sir. So, who is currently an assistant professor in the Department of Humanities and Sciences at IIT Roorkee, an avid researcher focusing on the domains such as R&D based innovation and growth, patent length and breadth, and human capital, along with subdomains such as innovation and economic growth. With such a prolific knowledge and abundance of experience in his various domains, it is our honor to have him with us today and to explain the pressing issues and guiding the attendance by answering the various questions which we have today. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Alex Thomas, sir, who is currently a professor at Azim Premji University. He completed his MA and MPhil in economics from the University of Hyderabad and further cementing his PhD in economics from the University of Sydney. The subdomains which are pursued by him are macroeconomic theories and policies, the historical connection between physical sciences and economics, and adding further to his cap, he also has his textbook Macroeconomics, an introduction published by the Cambridge University Press, which will be out by this month. With such an amount of experience and being an off it with various domains, a personality, we are privileged to have him with us for being here today and guide the attendees to answer the various queries. We welcome each one of the speakers today for Starting with the most common question which is there in everyone's mind is the current stance of our economy. I mean, if you see that each one of us wants our economy to, wants our economy to get back on track, and we want all the economic activities to resume once again, just like before the pre-COVID levels. Because if you see that the year 2020 was a year like no other, no, apart from the casualties that we saw today, it was a very economically challenging year for us as well. Uh, Actually, I have some statistics over here which were published by the I think United Nations, and it showed that if we that unemployment levels in India before the COVID pandemic struck, it was about 8.5%. Before that was before 2020, and after in April 2020, the unemployment rate shot up to I think 24%. However, in this latest quarter, the fourth quarter, it has come down to 6%. But on the other hand, the poverty rate has also rose to a very dangerous level. And the UN now predicts that the Indian economy would recover by 7.3% by this year, and against a negative drop of 9.6% we saw last year. So my question to Mr. N.D. Mathur sir is that, can we know that when we might see our economic activities recovering back to the pre-pandemic levels? Can we know your opinion on this?
It's first of all, I'm extremely thankful to the club and the VIT Vellore
Yes,
for having invited me for this economics panel,
thank you, sir.
and I'm extremely thankful to my fellow speakers also who are
Thank you, sir.
joining me in this prestigious conclave.
Okay.
Regarding your question that when we will be on the back on the track,
Yes,
it's
sir.
very difficult to say that giving the exact timing or the estimation, but it depends on how quickly we deal with the vaccination, how quickly we deal with the pandemic, and faster the rate of vaccination, I think, the more quickly will be the recovery. And OECD, that is the Economic Cooperation and Development Organization, has said that by early 2022, we may recover. That is 5.6% will be the growth rate in October, December 2021 and 4% in 2022. And if we are able to do 50 to 60% vaccination very quickly, I think by early 2022, that is maybe January, for in the first quarter of 22, we'll be able to recover. But the downturns are there, and if there was even minus 23.9% GDP growth in the first quarter of 2021, then minus 7.5% growth was also there. But you see, with which rate country will develop and when will be on the track, it depends on how quickly we take the action and what kind of decisions we take, and how whether our decisions, we take correct decisions or not, whether the fiscal measures we are taking, those fiscal measures are working or not, whether they are, the subsidy which we are giving is going at the right place or not, it is timely or not, it is targeted or not, it is to the right person or not, and it should be temporary also. It should disappear when the problem goes. So, in fact, there is after globalization, we were in a good position. And in Columbia University, there is Jagdish Bhagwati, and Jagdish Bhagwati's book is In Defense of Globalization. And he is in favor of globalization. Whereas the Joseph Stiglitz, who is also in Columbia University, he talks about the discontents of globalization or the making globalization work. And then Amartya Sen also, who was very right in his book. His book is India's Economic Development. And Amartya Sen was very right when he said that you may have capitalism, you may bring upsizing in all the sectors, or you may do downsizing in the government, but right sizing is required, and especially education is such an area, but health is such an area, and sanitation is such an area where the government action is needed. And today Amartya Sen has come true, where the health sector must get the priority, and we are lacking. We are in short of oxygen, we are in shortage of ventilators, we are in shortage of the health equipments. So I think what Amartya Sen said was correct. And now regarding the discussion between Jagdish Bhagwati and then who said in defense of globalization, whether globalization is good or not. So Bhagwati says growth is necessary. Growth will automatically take care of poverty. You were talking about poverty rate. That poverty rate is increasing, and now it has come down also. So Bhagwati says on the one hand that growth will automatically take care of poverty. Whereas on the other end, the Amartya Sen says that growth may be necessary. It is necessary, but it will not automatically take care of poverty. It is the government which has to come forward to take care of it with these special measures wherever it is required, and especially uh, the the people who are responsible for growth are those, the capitalists in whose pocket the growth is going. The bottom of their reservoirs are so strong they don't allow anything to come down. On the one hand, Jagdish Bhagwati says that growth will trickle down, and when it will trickle down, it will automatically take care of poverty. But they doesn't allow anything to trickle down. They don't have any leakages. Their bottom of their reservoirs is so strong, which reservoirs, the capitalist reservoirs, that they don't allow any trickle down. And that is why the special measures, Amartya Sen says that special measures are required by the government, especially in the area of health, sanitation, education, and especially poverty eradication. Then only the problem will be solved. So my take on this is that it depends on the how fast the vaccination takes place, and then how fast we take actions and the right actions. And by I think by the early 2022, the economy may be on the track.
That was a really insightful answer. You also mentioned about the vaccination drive. I think what I feel is that we have also divided opinions on this vaccination drive. So, anyways, I would like to pass on the mic to Mr. Bharat D sir for his stance on this question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank everyone in Dream Merchant for organizing this lovely event where
Okay.
we have experts like Professor Mathur and Professor Alex Thomas. So I fully agree with what Professor Mathur has suggested, that we should have a strong healthcare infrastructure, which is right now we are seeing that in the pandemic it's breaking down. So I think there should be proper steps taken by the government to have the necessary healthcare facilities, and it should make sure that the health. Okay, now there are many individuals who cannot afford health insurance, so I think it is very important to come up with plans that provide affordable healthcare, okay, to all the individuals at a very subsidized premium rates. That is very important. Also, it is another important thing that we need to have in these situations is livelihood as well. So lives plus livelihood, both the things have to be seen now. And as livelihoods have been affected, okay, lots of jobs have been lost, and so necessary steps should be taken. One of them is to provide jobs through Manrega, which is which we have seen from the data provided by RBI, that last year post lockdown, when unlocking began, there has been an increased demand for Manrega jobs, and in many states they were not able to meet the demand, so they could not create new jobs. So it is very important. And also the migration that is happening, the states where migrant workers are coming back, they should have a proper infrastructure ready for them to provide them jobs, loans, credit if they require, and which will help them to set up their own businesses. So I think this is how the country or the economy can revive back.
That was also very enlightening from Mr. Bharati. So finally, I would like to know from Mr. Alex Thomas as well his opinion on this question.
Thanks so much, Ishan, and thank you again. Like my colleagues also mentioned, thanks for having me here. I think I would just add on to a few things that has already been said, and I'll just make 3 points. One, I think that what we have seen is really a loss of our idea of the public. What we are seeing is we don't have public health. It is in shambles, and it has always been in shambles. But now that we have a crisis at hand which calls for everybody to be vaccinated. So far, what we have seen is people who had money could go to and access private health, either through insurance or otherwise, and people who did not, we don't care. But what the crisis has really shown us is that when something like this happens, everybody is in it together. And there is no way that even if you have money, there is no way that, anybody can be saved. So the first real point is that we need to revive our idea of the collective or to being together. And here I want to add one more point. There is an idea of what is called a necessary or a necessity, and this is there as far back as in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, which he wrote in 1776, where he writes that even education is to be seen as something that everybody should have access to. In other words, he understood even the importance of public education, that everybody should have access to education. So that's the first point, that I think that we need to have a stronger idea and a sense of the public. The second point, Ishan, you mentioned this, that pre-COVID, the unemployment rate was 6%. So there are two issues here. One is that we don't have very good trackers of unemployment in India. The data collection itself and how the data is collected. And for instance, how do we account for underemployment? How do we account for disguised unemployment? So there are these questions. And so to me, we always had a crisis. COVID just exacerbated the livelihood crisis. But even before crisis, now 6%, even by any estimate, is a very large proportion, or it's a very large number when you look at absolute values. So that's the second point, that we had a crisis even before COVID. Now the third point is that along with the pre-COVID situation, which is that we had unemployment, we had underemployment, we had poverty, but we also have significant inequality. And Dr. Mathur sir already mentioned, Amartya Sen has repeatedly written about it, and many others have written about it. And I think there is a link between this widening inequality and a loss of the sense of public. Because if I have money, I can live in a gated community, I can send my child using a private bus to a private school. Sanitation is taken care of because I can install an air purifier, I have a water purifier. I don't have to worry about anything else because I have the money, and I am not making demands on the public healthcare system. I am not making demands on the public education system. So I think to end with that point, that we really need to think together about how we can, as a society, as a community, as an economy, really revive our idea of the public.
That was also very those were also very wonderful insights. So next question which we have, and I think Bharat sir can answer this question, is that sir, in your opinion, what do you think the India's recovery shape is going to look like? Like, is it going to be a U-shaped recovery, a V-shaped one, or a L-shaped recovery? Can we know your insights on this?
So I agree with what Professor Thomas mentioned just now with respect to data collection and how it is being used in the research area as well. So most of the macro data that we see, macro variables that are collected, these are mostly in comes with lag. Okay, you don't get real-time data with most of the macro variables. So what happens is, when you have this kind of lag information, you don't get the understanding of what is happening in the economy right now. So what happens, the policies that you take, it may happen that you are taking the incorrect policies, okay, which may, instead of helping the economy, they do bad for the economy, right? So that is why there is an emphasis now. You will see if you go to RBI website and all, you will see that they are making an effort to do something called nowcasting, which is taking the real-time variables, real-time data that is available, and they are trying to forecast what is going to happen. Okay, so I think this is one way to that will help us to understand how the economy is performing. Now, in case of pandemic, all the values that we see, all the GDP values and other macro data that we have, they are all like advanced estimates or budget estimates, right? And they will undergo changes after like 1 year or 2 years, right? Before we actually see what was the actual estimate. So based on these estimates, the advanced estimates that was given by the government, I think it clearly shows that there is a V-shaped recovery. Okay, so but but making this, I mean, to come up with a very strong result, whether it is a V-shaped or U-shaped, I think it would take some time because we don't have a proper way of understanding or knowing what is the current GDP or what is the current employment level.
And so can we know this from Andy Mathur sir as well about this?
I have two takes on this. Number one, we are more interested in recovery, whatever be the shape, whether it is U shape or V shape or L shape. We are more interested in recovery of the economy or revival of the economy. The number two, the regarding V shape recovery, I would say that when we fall at a higher rate. But when we go up, we go with a gradual rate. The rise is always gradual, whereas fall is always steep. And when the fall is steep and rise is gradual, how it can make a V shape. Though it was expected that there will be V shaped recovery, and data may also, if the evidences are there, definitely we may agree to this. But I believe that because of this theory that fall is steep and rise is gradual, it will be right shaped recovery, like a Nike's, like the right slogan we have in the Nike's cap. Probably that would be the shape of recovery, in my view. But
So, so another question which is related to this topic only is that so what do you think would be the key decisions key decisions which will be taken by the government to make sure that the economy recovery is faster than we expect? I mean, if we see that I think in May 2020 last year, the government released a stimulus package of worth I think $260 billion, and followed by in November as well they released the package worth I think 35 billion in size. So, like, can we expect such more stimulus packages to be around in the near future? Can I know from Mr. Alex Thomas?
Okay. So, I mean, I don't, and again, I'm not going to give a very specific answer because I don't know what the government is thinking. But I want to talk a little bit about how the government and a lot of economists think about public debt or borrowing.
Okay.
Because most of the stimulus is actually coming from borrowing, and whenever the government spends, there will be one group of economists who argue that this is not good for the economy, and there's another group of economists who say that this is good for the economy. And what is the source of this? The source of this is what we have by legislation, which is called the Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act, or the FRBM Act, which stipulates that we have to only spend a certain proportion. The government can only spend a certain amount.
Yes.
This, to me, is an ideology because if you look at advanced countries like Japan or the US, they have very large levels of public debt, and they're all advanced, however we understand it. In other words, there is no, I mean, to me, there is no sound economic logic for imposing austerity, which is an extreme version of the FRBM Act. So one is the idea of whether we can have stimulus or not. The second, I think, I mean, if the government wishes to do something, I think it cannot see the COVID crisis as an individual event. It has to be seen, Dr. Mathur sir already mentioned this, it has to be seen in conjunction with health, livelihood, sanitation, education, nutrition, and more. I mean, in the case of vaccines, also our position on property rights, intellectual property rights. So all of these things have to come together. And I mean, if I can take one sort of point from engineering, which as students, I mean, you would have learned, is to think like a system. When you talk of a system, what we have, the central thing that comes to our mind is the idea of interdependence. All these themes, all these instances are interdependent. So unless the government comes with a coordinated plan which addresses all these issues, then otherwise I don't think the recovery will be good for everyone.
Okay. So can I know from Mr. Bharati as well, like about the stimulus package regarding that?
So there are a few things that we have to understand when the government announces stimulus packages. Okay, one is if we are if you want to know how important they are and what will be the impact, then we have to see how many people are benefited. Okay. So when you, let's say when the government is transferring the money, then what do people do? Okay. In the last year when COVID hit, this is an example from the US economy, where the US federal government had given stimulus packages. So then they did a research on it, so understanding what is the impact of the package and how many people have been benefited out of it. So they found that out of total 100%, only 15% have actually spent it. So whatever stimulus package they have received, only 15% spent it, and almost 35% they actually saved it. Okay, so the stimulus package, when you save it, it doesn't help the economy in the present scenario. It may have an impact in the future. Okay, so the one thing that the government is doing by giving stimulus packages is to boost the aggregate demand. So government wants people to spend, to consume, right? But if people don't consume, if they save it, then it may not benefit the economy in the current scenario. So it is very important to have this type of analysis. I think this has not been done in case of India. At least I have not come across any paper or any research that looks into this benefit. Okay. Other than that, the Indian government has given some stimulus packages, but whether it is helpful or not, whether there were beneficiaries, we still have to see that.
Okay. And so, coming to the topic of stimulus packages, I would like to know from Mr. N.D. Mathur sir as well about his opinion on this in this particular topic. So, and I want to know that should these packages be industry oriented, business oriented, or it should be just directly given to the needful people, the people who have low income households and those which have been severely impacted by the pandemic. So, how should the money be actually distributed?
In fact, stimulus packages are required, and they are required for individuals as well as for the industry. Because if the consumption has demand has to be aggregate demand has to be increased, then private consumption expenditure must also increase, and business consumption expenditure or the industry consumption expenditure must also increase, so that aggregate demand may go up. Then my take on stimulus package is that number one, it should be the correct person should be identified. Number one, as Professor Bharat was mentioning, that if you instead of consuming you start saving, it means you don't need it. So those who need it, it must go to the right person. Number one, that stimulus must go to a person to who is the right recipient of that. If it goes to the wrong recipients, then it has no meaning. It goes to the relatives of the sarpanch or the relative of the local self-government, then it has no meaning. So and then it must be direct. DBT, direct benefit transfer must be there. There should not be any middleman between that. But direct will also benefit only when the correct person has been identified. Otherwise, it will not work. Then it should be timely. When the stimulus is needed, when the migrants are on the road and the transport goes, then it is beneficial. If he has already reached and then you send the transport, it has no meaning. So, when it is needed, it should be timely. If it is after the time, it has no meaning. The patient is dead and then you have gone with the oxygen cylinder, it has no meaning. Patient is dead and then you say that you take the ventilator, it has no meaning.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And then thirdly, it should be targeted. It should hit at the right place. And fourthly, it should be temporary. It should not be permanent. What happens that once we start giving benefits to the people, they assume that it is permanent benefit to us. What is happening in case of minimum support price? What is happening in case of many other things that we started, we are not able to take them back. So it should be temporary and it must disappear automatically when the problem is solved, when it is not needed. And there should be ease of availing that benefit. If you give the benefit in the form of loan and the bank का form भरना है, बैंक से आपको उधार लेना है, and then allocated in the terms of borrowings rather than benefits, then nobody will go for taking loans, even in the zero rate of interest, because people don't have confidence of running the business. They can't even give you the, even if you are not charging interest rate, he has to give back the principal amount, and he cannot, because the return on investment is lower than, or the ROI is lower than the rate of interest. How he will give back the money? So in that case, he'll not, your monetary policy will fail. So a blend of action or initiatives must be taken, and it may be identifying the right persons, then skill development, filling the demand gap by C plus I plus D plus X minus M, that is consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports, and then the right kind of fiscal stimulus for MSMEs and startups, and then benefit of youth dividend can be taken up. The skilled youth is also there, and Professor Mr. Thomas was talking about FRBM. The FRBM should be kept in abeyance for some time. So because we are in crisis and we cannot go ahead with FRBM, we have to spend, and FRBM obstructs us to spend. So it should, for some years, it should be kept in abeyance. As we have kept the labor reforms in abeyance, we should keep the FRBM also in abeyance. And then a blend of health, hygiene, vaccination, etc. All these initiatives should be taken, and at the right time it should be taken, at the right place it should be taken, to the right person it should go, then only it will happen.
Uh, so that was also enlightening from all the three speakers. So last question on this topic, and I think this can be a little bit controversial in nature. So we all witnessed that various countries were really releasing the stimulus packages at the time of the pandemic struck during the lockdown periods, and which had various magnitudes and various frequencies. So it can be clearly seen that every country had invested in different sectors, in different industries they had invested, and even India did invested a huge amount of money. I think, as I mentioned before, the numbers, the $260 billion, and followed by $35 billion package in November. So do you think that these packages which were being released by the India, do you think the capital, this much capital, was rightly allocated? I mean, do you think it was all worth the money? Do you think the Modi government did the right job in allocating such a huge capital?
It didn't work, in fact. Are you asking whether this question is to me?
Yes, anyone can take it.
Yeah. I think whatever fiscal measures taken up by the government, it didn't work because they were in the form of loans and borrowings, and especially during the depression and the pandemic situation or the black swan incident like pandemic, what happens, that confidence is shattered.
Yes.
There is no business confidence of running the business. There is no aggregate demand in the economy. People are safe. People will save the money. They will not spend the money. So consumption is also low. And in such situation, return on investment is so low that even if you say that you take money and invest, I will not charge interest, he says, I will not take loans because business confidence at all is not there. And that adds fuel to the fire. This makes the vicious circle of poverty, that business is low, so unemployment is there, so the low income is there, so low productivity is there, and ultimately a vicious circle of poverty starts.
So okay, so we'll move on to Mr. Bharati. Can you share your insights as well?
So as I already said that we don't have enough evidence to understand whether it was directed to the people who need the packages and how effective they were, and whether they received it on time or not. We don't have enough evidence. So based on that, based on lack of evidence, we cannot fully say whether the packages were effective or not. I mean, yes, we need the packages. We at that time it was a matter of securing livelihoods, but whether it is effective or not, we don't have a clear-cut answer to that.
Okay, so we'll just move on. We'll just shift this the topic from stimulus package to another very popular confusion which is there in almost everyone's mind, and that is that how is this economic recession caused by the financial crisis of 2008, which was occurred in US, which was called subprime mortgage crisis, and it is different from the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 in 2020. So how do you think these two economic recessions were different from each other? Can we know from Mr. Alex?
Okay, so the 2008 global financial crisis can, I mean, we can very clearly say, based on evidence and historical evidence, that it occurred because of events which happened within the economy. That's the first one. I mean, within the the economy understood in a very strict nature. Whereas if you look at the COVID crisis, it is not something in a strict sense of the term. It is external to what happened in the economy. Although I must qualify it, because it is because of trade in wild animals, and it is because of the way humans have engaged with nature, and humans have maybe exploited nature and other kinds of things, that so there is that human nature interaction which is also considered to be a cause of the current crisis. Right? So but in a strict sense of the term, one can say that maybe one is more economic and the other is less economic, but this is debatable. But again, if you look at the global financial crisis, I would like to just mention two things. One is, I think, the lack of regulation of financial institutions. Some people could call it financial greed, because what happened was you allowed financial institutions in, to start introducing financial innovation, whereby, let's say that I issue a security and then there is something underlying it which gives it value. But people started building another security based on this security, and so on and so forth. So when a small bubble happened, or a small, the bubble burst, it meant that all these people who were holding on to this basically had nothing suddenly. Right? So one is that financial innovations have to be seen very carefully, because again, to go back to what I mentioned before, it is not the case that, and what is surprising is, or what we felt at that time, because of some people's want for more and more profits, and that's fine, it had consequences on so many people who lost their jobs across the world. So this interdependence that I'm talking about, the systemic kind of thinking, is also there in the international arena. Just like the COVID crisis happened somewhere because of how integrated we are or how globalized we are. One thing happening in one place, it can easily transmit to another place. Right? So the question of transmission is similar in both these cases.
Okay.
So, and just one last point really I want to make is, although initially I mentioned that one is more economic and the other is less economic, that is also because how economists have understood nature or ecology. We generally, if we study in microeconomics, it is somewhere towards 20th chapter. In macroeconomics, ecology is hardly even there in our textbooks. So I think it is important that we need to bring back our engagement with ecology and study it more systematically.
Okay. And so that was also very enlightful. And so can we know from Mr. Bharati as well about this 2008 crisis and COVID crisis difference?
Okay. So I think the two crises are very different. This is once in a century event, pandemic that has happened. I think the last one was similar to this was 100 years back in the Spanish flu. So comparing this and the financial crisis, I think it will be difficult, okay, because financial crisis that we had, it was mostly due to some lackness in the financial system. There was no proper regulatory mechanism at that time, maybe. Okay, so because of those things, the financial crisis, it moved from one country to another country because of globalization also. And this pandemic, it is different. I mean, even though we see the contagion effect here also, but as Professor Alex was saying, this is more, you can say this has to be more non-economic, and financial crisis to be more economic. So if we have proper regulation authorities and proper regulation measures, then we would stop these financial crises in the future. Okay. But these pandemic, these are not exactly in our hands. Okay, so these may occur again maybe 100 years later. So this is what I would suggest, that these two are not the same crisis.
Yes, yes, sir. And so finally, sir, can we know from Mr. Andy Masu sir as well on his take on this?
I would say that the 2008 crisis was because of bad economics,
Okay,
and present crisis has created economics bad. So it has made the economics bad, or the economic situation bad.
yes,
But there have been certain similarities also. The first similarity, as Professor Thomas talked about, that earlier 2008 crisis was of our financial, which was because of financial greed, and this is because of economic ecosystems greed, in fact, greed of ecosystem rather than the financial greed. Then both are global, both are contagious, transmission is there, but in fact, the subprime crisis was because of the experimentation with financial instruments, mortgaging them again and again, and that created problem. And India was least affected at that time, I would say, because we were so conservative in our prudential norms that our banks were least affected, and 2000 crisis could not do anything to India, and we were saved at that time. We were unaffected or least affected at that time. But in this crisis, we are not. We are equally affected as other countries are. Even more, we are most affected, not least affected, because of our population size.
yes,
Because 130 crore is the population, that means many countries size is very large, and because of that, we are most affected. Other than if the size of population would not have been 135 crores, the effect would have been less. We could have been very fast on the vaccination, etc. But it takes time because we need more resources for the more population. So we are most affected this time, we're least affected at that.
okay. So that was also very insightful. Actually, we have got a question from the audience itself about this topic, and so I just read out the question, and anyone of you can just mute, say the answer. So the question is like, considering the increase in number of NPAs in India, and reports say that Indian banks are likely to witness a sharp surge in the non-performing assets in the coming year, and also an RBI report says that the NPAs of India may rise to about 13.5% by September this year. And so, considering that this pandemic situation is going to last for some time more in India, so which basically means that there are high chances of NPAs increasing. So, his curator, the question is that what is the likelihood that the banks in India are going to crash, just like what happened in the subprime case in 2008, where we saw the, the, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers and all the Bears and Stearns. So, what is the likelihood that this event would happen in India? So can you answer, Mr. Bharati?
I don't think we will be the banks will be crashing, because I think the RBI is regulating well and is controlling the private banks and foreign banks. So I don't think we will be in a situation again as what happened in the subprime crisis.
Okay. So, so Andy Mathur, sir, can you also share your views on
I
this?
believe that most of banking sector in India is public sector banks,
Okay.
and when the banks are in public sector, there is a fiat which works, the government fiat works, and that's why I believe that they won't crash. Whatever be the situation, banks will not crash. Regulatory faith will and trust will prevail, and banks there may be increase in NPAs, but they will not crash.
Okay.
Mergers and acquisitions may take place, some changes may take place, but they will not crash.
Also, one thing that has happened here is, I would quickly like to add here, is that during the pandemic, the credit growth of banks have actually slowed. So this may reduce the future NPAs a little bit. The growth of NPAs may reduce.
Yeah.
Okay. And so another question, we will move on to the another question, and which is also recently observed phenomenon, and it's like we are seeing an enormous amount of growth in the pharmaceutical industry right now, and on the same hand, if we see that industries like the aviation industry, the hospitality industry, and even the automotive industry, they are facing great losses, and they have been just punished very badly by this when the pandemic struck. So, can any of the speakers give us a brief idea when these industries are going to recover? How much time it will take for them, and uh, yeah, so how much time these
I think with
industries?
the economic recovery, all sectors will recover. As
Okay,
the economic recovery takes place, the general recovery starts. Simultaneously, all the sectors will pick up. And I think the
okay,
first sector which will be in picking up very fast will be tourism and travel.
okay,
Because people are so fed up, people are so, the pent up feelings are there, and I think it will be fast recover, will be the tourism and travel.
okay. So, any of the speakers can answer this?
So if you look at the stock market performance since the unlocking has begun, you would see that most of the IT companies and automobile companies they have given more than 100% return. If you go by the stock market
Yes,
performance,
yes.
and also I think sometime in October or November, the Sensex touched 50,000. Right. So these, if you consider that these are uh, evidence of firms performing or improving their performances, then I think the companies have recovered. And
So,
even in the recent crisis, when the cases started to increase from end of March again, there was not like a major setback in the Sensex or in the Nifty. So it means that the companies have are robust, and their performance has been like improving.
so another question from the audience, and I think it's directed to Mr. Andy Mathur, sir. So you said that the benefit should be given on a temporary basis. So the speaker thinks that what comes to his mind is that the see the he has the model of this the business model of Canada. He thinks that what they've been doing is that they have been directly providing the money to the people who lost their paychecks. How that's how the Canadian government is doing. So today Canada is still better placed than a lot of countries in terms of the economic catastrophe that every country is facing. So can you share your views on this, sir?
I said temporary because when the need is not there, when aggregate demand has already gone up, but the
Okay.
purpose is served. I think it should disappear. How long government can bear the burden of that subsidy? Where from the taxes will come? Where from the revenue will come? That was the idea of subsidy.
Okay.
How
So
long you can collect the revenue from the people
okay.
in the name of subsidy?
Okay. So, sir, the final question on this topic from our side, the final question from the on this topic from our side is that so it's a very popular opinion among the economists and among the common people that the slowdown in the Indian economy before the pre-COVID levels, that was before March 2020, it was because of global factors including the US-China trade war and some other factors which led to the slowdown overall. So if that's really the case, could you suggest some quick revival points the government should take to ensure that this we recover from this such situation? Can I know from Mr. Bharati, sir?
Okay, so see, first of all, as I can understand, in macroeconomics, most of the variables are interconnected. So it is very difficult to isolate that to and say that okay, only because of this factor the slowness is coming in the economy. This is incorrect. You cannot do that, right? You cannot separate or isolate one effect from the other. Okay, because of globalization as well. So so what India can do because of this trade war that is happening, India can take advantage of it, okay, and try to bring the companies that are planning to exit Chinese economy, Chinese market. Okay, and in this area, I think India must take more steps that will attract foreign direct investment. Okay, and another reason why the companies are leaving China is also the rising cost. Okay, China is now more or less the average worker's age in China is around 40-45. So the labor costs are also increasing. So, and compared to that, India is almost a very young country. Okay, so this could be one added attraction for foreign companies to come and invest. And I think if you go to Invest in India website, the government is actually trying to come up with policies so that new companies come in and they set up their business in this country. Okay, so it would take time. We would not see the impact in like 1 year or 2 years. Okay, so these things take time. So I think down 5 years we would definitely see some positive things happening in this FDI side.
Okay. Mr. Alex, sir, can you also share your opinions on this?
Yeah. So earlier, Dr. Mathur sir had briefly mentioned that in macroeconomics we have the accounting that Y equals C plus I plus G plus net exports. So the way I want to respond to it is the following. So broadly, we can break that down into Y equals domestic demand and plus foreign demand. Now, the point that you're trying to make here is to say how much should this foreign demand play a role in determining our output and also growth of output. So if it is difficult to have international relations and trade and agreements, then I think the government's focus should be more on domestic demand. How can we create domestic demand? And here one would be, of course, by direct government investment in things like health, education, sanitation, already I've mentioned, along with NREGA as a sort of backup. It can also be by giving incentives to the private sector to undertake research and development, to expand their capacity. And it can also be through giving the reduced interest rate loans to households who want to revive consumption. So I think these three things we can talk of more domestic demand driven growth rather than relying on foreign demand.
So that was the ending of the questionnaire session from our side. So now I would like to open the questions from the audience who have gathered here today, and we already have some questions here. So the first question is from Srinivas V, and he asks that once the economy starts to recover, which sectors of economy will recover more quickly? Which will be the ones to recover faster? So Bharat D, sir, can you answer?
I mean, it's difficult to say, but if you go by the stock market performances, then it's the mostly service industry that has bounced back.
Okay, and so ND Mathur, sir, can you
I
also?
think I have already answered this question that as the economy will grow up, all sectors will grow up, and simultaneously all sectors will grow up. But tourism and travel, in my opinion, will grow faster. As it also part of service sector, but tourism and travel will move faster.
Okay. And so next question is from Pankaj Pandey, and it's a very interesting question. So recently the government of India announced these disinvestments and privatizations of the PSU sectors. So the question is that do this privatization of PSU and the disinvestments would help the economy? I mean, what will be the overall effect of this move? Is this a good idea or there can be an alternative to this policy? So can I know from Alex, sir?
Yeah. So again, I mean the short answer, and then I'll tell you the long answer. The short answer is that it depends, because it depends on the PSU that one is trying to disinvest or trying to sell off. I don't think that there is anything intrinsically valuable or not valuable about a PSU. It really depends on how the PSU is being operated, because the counter question to this can be, if a private sector undertaking is doing poorly, Can the government just come and say, shut shop? Can we just close it, or can we just take it back? Or can we have something like the opposite of that? Right? So the question really is, what is the kind of PSU that we are talking about? So for instance, if we have a PSU which is dealing with sanitation or health or education or something else, which we think is important, then we have to make a case by case decision.
Okay. And can I know from Mr. N.D. Mathur sir as well about this privatization of PSUs?
Yeah, I think in 1991 we started the process of this investment.
Okay.
At that time, economy was in a bad shape, and the PSUs were not working well, and whatever was promised by PSUs, that was not realized. So there was wide gap between promise and the performance of the PSUs, and so we started the process of this investment. And at that time, I think the decision was correct. But as Dr. Thomas is rightly pointing out, that disinvestment of which public sector unit? It should be case by case. If a profit-making public sector is being sold, what is the fun in doing that? It is giving revenue to the government. But if a sick unit is being sold, if a unit which is incurring losses, and then unit which is not very strategically important, because we were making, even the bread was being made, the modern bread was sold, bread was being made in public sector, or even the smallest things were being made with the public sector which were not relevant. Why Ashoka Hotel should be needed in the public sector? So, which are the loss-making enterprises and sick enterprises in the government sector? If their shares are sold and disinvested, I think it is a right move. But if the profit-making enterprises like sale of, if there was a strategic sale of Hindustan Zinc Limited, or then many other who were sold at a very throwaway prices. Hindustan Zinc was sold at a throwaway price to the Vedanta, and when the strategic sale is done, given to only to the one party, the share should be sold to many people. Why to one party only? So there should be case by case decision. Number one. And disinvestment proceeds, what we do out of proceeds of the disinvestment. घर का सोना तो बेच दिया हमने, पर तक किया क्या? So if we reinvest it in something, in building the assets for the country, then it is good. But if we just use it in giving subsidies and consumption expenditure, it is bad.
The audience, it is that seeing the last year performance of the stock market, people are really optimistic about investing into stocks. So as all of you experts are and expert in the field of economics, what advice would you give to such people, and how exactly the stock market and the country's economy is related to each other? Can I know from any of the speaker?
So I'm partly just thinking of when I was studying economics or doing my masters. I remember many of at that time there were a lot of PhD theses and MPhil theses which were published on the financial market. And I remember, just thinking to myself and having a discussion with some of my classmates, asking the very simple question: what is the proportion of Indians who actually invest in the share market? That's the number one. The second question is, what is the proportion of Indians who actually pay income tax? That is, their income is above the taxable limit. And the third related question is, what is the proportion of Indians who are in the informal sector? And I think that all these three, when you put together, you get a sense of what you think is important. Is it where most people are, or is it where most news is being built, or is it what is driving industry? That's a matter of what we want to focus on. The stock market has two elements. One is the primary market. The initial public offering happens. And that is a very important role, because if firms do not have money of their own, they have to raise capital. And so the IPOs play an important role. Now, the question about the Sensex and other such things is they're all secondary markets. What is the purpose of that? One argument is that it gives us some indicator of these actual companies, but mostly, to my mind, they are speculation. People are trying both to invest in them to make more money. It's speculative fundamentally in nature. And are they really adding to production? Are they really directly adding to capacity of the economy? I don't think so. Right? But are they important? Yes, they are important because they have an impact on investors' expectations, and then that has an impact on other things. And it also has an impact on how governments think whether their policies are actually positive for the industry or not. Whether it is misplaced or not, it's a different matter, but that's how the current thing is. So just to repeat, we have to think of the percentage of people, I think, because after all, the economy is not just a dead thing. We are talking about living people, right? And what is important for them.
So that was also very insightful. Another question which we have from the audience it is like, so how do the speakers view the Atmanirbhar Bharat policy of this government? So speaker says that while the government says that this will strengthen our economy, but some economists, including former CEA Arvind Subramaniam, has said that this is a wrong policy since it implies a fall in imports, and which will then lead to a fall in exports. So he's basically asking that, what is your take on this? Can the speaker share your views on this policy of the government?
The thing is, what has happened due to globalization is that this concept of made in has completely is completely eliminated. Okay, so we don't have like a particular country is coming up with a product. It's mostly that different companies are involved in the making of the product, and then it reaches one particular country where it is assembled. So this made in concept, this is slowly going down. Okay, and what is coming up is assembly. Okay. So in many if you look at your cell phone production, the cell phone uses inputs from South Korea. It includes inputs from Germany, inputs from Vietnam, inputs from India. Okay, all these inputs reach China, and where it is assembled, and then it goes to different countries as final product. So this concept of like make in, it's I think it should be dissolved. Okay, and what should come up is India should be like part of that assembling countries where the inputs come in, assemble, and then they go. Okay, so that would actually help create more jobs and come and create more industries.
Okay. So I think, sir, we have a last question over here for this session, and it says that does globalization help or hinder the developing countries of the world? So anyone can answer this? So Mr. Bharat, sir, you can try.
So I mean, there are always negative and positive sides, and I mean, if we go back, the position we are in compared to what we were earlier, then we definitely have made improvement in certain areas, right? So our foreign direct investment has gone up since 2000, and with further relaxation, the foreign direct investments are going up, and we are also in a way collaborating with other firms in other countries like Japan, Germany, where we are able to get their latest technologies and work on that. So this is actually helping the absorption capacity of the country, whereby we in the coming years we will be in a position to become the leaders of innovation. Okay, which will help the economy to grow. So I think the globalization has helped the economy to grow.
Okay, and Alexa, you can also share your views on this.
So I would like to think of this question as a larger question sometimes posed in the classroom of this difference between market and government. Right? And globalization is a particular form of the manifestation of how we want markets to organize our economy. Now, if you ask me the question, are the markets good? It really depends. And why do I say it depends? It depends on whether there are existing power structures, whether it could be gender, it could be caste, it could be religion. So it depends on whether the markets can work because of that or because of economic inequality. If you ask me, are the governments good? Again, the answer is it depends. If there are existing institutions of caste or gender and other issues happening, there is no, I mean, you cannot take an idea and just think that it always works. One has to really build on it. And let me just make one point. Before colonialization, before we were colonized, and long way, if you look at history, we had globalization in the form of trade between the people in the Indian Ocean world. So we were trading with the coast of Africa, we were trading with Southeast Asia. This was happening. It is not, globalization is not a new thing. It has always happened that coastal regions across the world have always traded with each other. Now, colonialism is a peculiar kind of thing which needs to be studied. And again, it depends on how we globalize, just like it depends on how we choose to grow. Are we ignoring some sectors? Are we focusing on other things? Are we ensuring that everybody is growing or not?
It is not at its place they should show the market what is your place. The regulatory agencies are not strong. They are only using their wisdom tooth. They are not using their biting teeth. That if the market is distorting, if market is not at its place, if market is exploiting, charging exorbitant prices, they should use their biting teeth to tell them what is your place. So I think I think the regulation is the right answer.
Okay. And so with that, sir, I would like to conclude this event which we have been conducting. So I would like to say that we are very grateful to all the three speakers, Mr. Andy Mathur, sir, Mr. Alex Thomas, and Mr. Bharat D, sir, who took out the valuable times today and enlightened us with their vast knowledge and the sliver of their experience. So we at EN Dream Merchants feel immensely delighted to have you as a part of our event today. Today's session was full of interesting insights and facts. It gave us a deep vision on the subject of economics and also revealed many unknown facts which were unknown to a lot of people. I'm pretty sure that the precious knowledge that you gave us today will definitely help us in our studies and our future plans as well. So once again, sir, I would like to thank you, all of you, for being here today and making our event a grand success. So with that, I would like to end the meeting, and I would request the audience to end the call. Request the audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.